I never believed in blind dates. And I especially didn't believe in blind dates arranged by my mother. That was my mantra. And here I was, sitting in a high-end restaurant in Manhattan, questioning everything I thought I knew about myself. The golden light from the chandeliers spilled across the white linen tablecloths and polished silverware, giving the room a warm, almost nostalgic glow. The rain pattered gently against the windows, adding a soft rhythm to the otherwise quiet ambience. I, Ethan Turner, CEO of Turner Ventures, was sitting at a corner table, alone. I was dressed in a perfectly tailored navy suit, my wristwatch gleaming faintly under the soft light. I glanced at my watch. Again 7:10 p.m., my date was supposed to arrive at 7:15. And frankly, I wasn't expecting much. I wasn't here because I wanted to be. I wasn't here because I thought anything good would come out of it. I was here because of my mother. She had been sick for months, kidney failure. The kind that doesn't give you much time, and when she asked me to meet this woman she had met through her volunteer work, I couldn't say no. Not to her. I had already decided that I would stay for 20 minutes. Just enough to make polite conversation and then excuse myself. That was the plan. At exactly 7:12 p.m., the door opened. She stepped in, shaking off the rain from her umbrella. And I immediately knew that this wasn't going to be like any of the other dates I'd been on. She wasn't wearing a designer dress or heels that screamed luxury, but there was something about her that caught my attention. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a loose twist, and her simple green dress, while not flashy, seemed to fit her in a way that was perfectly elegant. She wasn't strikingly beautiful by the world's standards, but there was a calmness to her that intrigued me. She looked around, searching the room, and then her eyes met mine. A brief smile, warm, steady, crossed her face. Not the kind of smile meant to dazzle, but the kind that made you feel like you'd known the person your whole life. "Mr. Turner," she said softly. "Ethan," I replied, pushing my chair back to stand. I wasn't sure if I was annoyed or amused by her straightforwardness. "Thanks for coming." She took a seat, her hands folding neatly in her lap, as if she'd been here 1,000 times before. The waiter brought the menus and poured the water before leaving us in the silence. "I know this probably isn't your thing," she said, her voice light but genuine. "To be honest, it's not really mine either. But your mum talked about you all the time, so I felt like I should come. I mean, she talks about your coffee order, how you organize your socks. It's a little unsettling, to be honest." I raised an eyebrow. "That sounds unsettling," she laughed, and I noticed something. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't trying to fill the silence. There was no desperate need to impress. "I promise I'm not a stalker. I work with your mum at the clinic sometimes. I'm a third-grade teacher, and I volunteer a few nights a week." I studied her, not sure what to make of it. A teacher. A volunteer. What was I supposed to do with that? I had met enough ambitious women to last a lifetime, the ones who came with plans and schemes, but her. She seemed perfectly content and even comfortable in her own skin. I couldn't help myself. "So, what does a day in the life of a teacher look like?" I asked, half to break the silence, half out of genuine curiosity. I had no idea what it would be like to teach children, especially kids that young. She smiled, a bit mischievous. "Well, let's see. There's a lot of arguing about whether Pluto is still a planet. And then there's the occasional disaster when someone forgets to bring their lunch." I chuckled. The sound surprised me. It felt real, not forced. "And you?" she asked. "What's a CEO's day like?" Fire someone, read 30 emails, cancel meetings. Pretty much, I replied with a smirk, though I try not to let it get too boring. I studied her again, my gaze lingering just a moment longer than usual. Most people asked questions like that to be polite, but she asked because she was actually curious. And that was different. She leaned back slightly, folding her hands over her lap. You know, I think I've got it easy. I teach third graders. They're honest, they say whatever comes to their minds, no filters. It's raw. It's exhausting, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. Her eyes lit up as she spoke, and for a brief moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't the usual amusement I got from bantering with business associates or random dates. It was something deeper. That sounds pretty intense, I said, my curiosity piqued. But they trust you, don't they? They trust whoever shows up, she replied. They don't need perfection. They just need someone who's there, day in and day out. The conversation shifted, and the more she spoke, the more I found myself listening. She wasn't talking about big dreams or goals. She wasn't measuring success in promotions or stock options. She spoke about showing up, about being present for those who needed her most. It was a stark contrast to the world I lived in, a world where people always had something to prove, where every action was calculated for an end goal. I felt a pang of something unfamiliar. Maybe guilt, maybe something else. I wasn't sure, but I was definitely uncomfortable. And what do you do when you can't fix things? I asked quietly. She hesitated, a soft sadness in her eyes. I do what I can. I make sure they feel seen. I remind them they matter. And when that's not enough, ... She trailed off, and I could see the weight in her eyes, the exhaustion. I still show up the next day. Her words hung in the air like a cloud. I found myself unable to respond. What could I say? I had never considered something so simple, so pure as just showing up. To me, the solution to every problem had always been money or power or some form of leverage. But Lily, she didn't need any of that. As the night wore on, I found myself watching her more than I intended. It wasn't the kind of watchful gaze you give someone you're trying to impress or even understand. It was a deeper kind of observation. For the first time in my life, I wondered if I was missing something essential, something that didn't have a price tag or a contract attached. When the waiter returned to clear the plates, Lily barely touched her food. But when he left, she called out to him. "Excuse me, could I get a to-go bag?" she asked, her tone casual, like it was the most normal thing in the world. The waiter nodded, and she took the bag without a word. Then, to my surprise, she walked toward the large window and opened it just wide enough to slip the bag of food outside. Across the street, under the scaffolding tarp, a man was huddled against the building, his knees pulled to his chest. She crossed the street, crouched down, and handed him the bag of food. She didn't say anything. She didn't linger. She just gave him the food and walked back inside. I watched her return to the table, a quiet kind of realization settling in. No fanfare, no speeches, just an act of kindness. The simplicity of it hit me harder than anything I'd ever done in my entire life. It made me question everything I had been focused on, everything I had ever thought mattered. And for the first time that night, I forgot to check my watch. Instead, I stayed. I should have left. After the food, after the way she quietly gave it to the man on the street, right in front of me. With no grand gesture or words, everything about the evening felt different. out of place. I had planned to leave. I had committed to 20 minutes, no more. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, something inside me. The rest of the evening passed in an almost surreal way. The rain outside continued to fall in sheets, creating a soft backdrop for our quiet conversation. I found myself asking questions, not because I needed to know the answers, but because I was genuinely curious. "Do you ever get frustrated?" I asked her after a long pause, my voice quieter than usual. "I mean, how do you not get fed up with everything? The kids, the challenges, the lack of resources." She looked at me, her eyes steady. "Of course I get frustrated. It's not always easy. Some days it feels like I'm doing everything and nothing at the same time. But when I see one of those kids smile, or when I see them try a little harder because they know someone cares, it's worth it." I sat back in my chair, her words sinking in deeper than I expected. My life, my work, it all felt so shallow now, so transactional. Every interaction I had with others, every deal, every partnership, it was all about what I could get in return. But Lily, she didn't work that way. She did it because it was the right thing to do, without expecting anything in return. There was a quiet tension between us as the night went on, a tension I hadn't anticipated. I wasn't used to this, to someone who didn't need anything from me, who didn't care about my wealth or status. By the time the check arrived, I was more unsettled than when I had first walked in. I couldn't quite figure out what to make of her, or why I felt so drawn to her. But what I did know was that I didn't want the night to end. I stood up, offering to walk her out. She hesitated, glancing at the door and then back at me. "I was just going to take the subway," she said, but the wind picked up and the rain came down harder, as if on cue. Sending a shiver through her, I grabbed my umbrella and stepped toward her. "I'll give you a ride. It's the least I can do." She raised an eyebrow. "You sure? The train's just a few blocks away." "It's no trouble," I said, trying to sound casual, but I could tell I wasn't fooling either of us. The truth was, I didn't want the night to end, and somehow, this felt like a way to delay it. We walked out into the rain, and I held the umbrella over both of us as we crossed the sidewalk. There was a certain ease to it, to the silence that settled between us, like we didn't need to fill every moment with words. I couldn't remember the last time I had just ... existed with someone without feeling the weight of expectations or obligations. We got into my car, and I drove her to her apartment in silence. The city outside blurred in the rain, the light streaking past like a watercolor painting. She sat beside me, calm, collected, with her hands folded neatly in her lap. I glanced at her from time to time in the rearview mirror, but she wasn't looking at me. Her attention was on the world outside, as if she had no care about the life I led, or the life I thought I was supposed to lead. When we arrived at her building, she turned to me, her face soft but serious. "Thanks for the ride." I wasn't expecting that. "Of course," I said, not really sure what else to say. "You okay?" She nodded, her smile a little more hesitant than usual. "I'm fine, just don't worry about me." She reached for the door handle, but then paused, turning back toward me. "I'm glad I came tonight," she said quietly. "I think your mum was right. You're not what I expected." I watched her step out of the car, her silhouette disappearing into the rain, and for a moment, I felt like I was watching something slip away, something I hadn't even known I wanted. But what was it? What was this feeling that had been building all evening? It wasn't just physical attraction. It wasn't even just about her personality. It was something deeper, something that I couldn't quite understand yet. As I drove away, I told myself it was nothing, just a fleeting moment. I had met countless people, after all, but somehow this one felt different. The next day was filled with the usual whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and decisions. But every time I glanced out of my office window, I couldn't help but think of her. I thought about her laugh, the way her eyes softened when she talked about the kids she worked with, the kindness in her actions, like when she gave that meal to the man on the street. I found myself replaying our conversation, wondering what had drawn me to her. There was nothing extraordinary about her on the surface, and yet everything about her felt like a force I couldn't ignore. As the day stretched on, I decided to take a break and go for a walk. I needed to clear my head. Maybe that's why I found myself on the streets of East Harlem later that afternoon. I was supposed to be inspecting a potential site for a new development, but my mind kept drifting back to her. I was crossing the street when I saw her again. There she was, standing in a small schoolyard, surrounded by a group of kids. The image hit me like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just a teacher. She was real. Real in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be in a long time. She was laughing with a child, kneeling beside them, helping them with something, completely engrossed in their world. The rawness of it, the simplicity, there was no pretense, no ego, just presence. It struck me in a way I didn't know how to process. I watched from a distance, my heart pounding in my chest. This woman, this person who seemed to have everything figured out, she was doing something I could never have imagined for myself. She was giving everything to these children, without asking for anything in return. And in that moment, I realized how much I had been missing in my life. How much I had been hiding behind my empire, my money, my reputation. I had built all of this, but it was all empty, wasn't it? Because I hadn't been there for anyone. Not really. I didn't know what to do with this new realization. But I knew one thing. This wasn't the last time I'd see Lily. The next few days were a blur of meetings and strategy sessions. But no matter how hard I tried to focus, my mind kept wandering back to Lily, to her smile, to the way she spoke so simply, so honestly, and to that moment when she gave the food to the homeless man outside. It stuck with me, like a splinter buried under my skin, one that refused to let me rest. I told myself it was just a fleeting feeling, nothing more than an unusual connection that happened over one night. But the more I tried to push it away, the more it lingered. I couldn't explain it. I'd had plenty of interactions with women. Hell, I was a successful CEO in New York City. Women were never in short supply, but none had ever made me feel like this. None had ever made me question my own life the way she did. And then, as if by some cosmic pull, I saw her again. I was at the site for a new potential development in East Harlem. The morning was cold, the sky a muted grey, and I was just starting to review the architect's plans when I heard the unmistakable sound of children's laughter. It wasn't the kind of noise you expect in a busy city like this. It was louder, clearer, more ... joyful. My attention snapped to the left, and there, through the open gates of a schoolyard, was Lily. She was standing in the middle of a group of children, crouched down, talking to them, laughing with them. She was different, here lighter, freer. The kids surrounded her like she was the sun, and they were all orbiting around her warmth. Something inside me stirred. I was supposed to be reviewing the property, checking the measurements, ensuring the deal would go through. But all I could focus on was her. There was something so genuine about the way she interacted with those kids. It was like she wasn't just teaching them. She was present with them. No distractions, no pretense, just her and them. I watched for a moment longer than I should have, my eyes tracing her every movement. A little girl tugged at her sleeve, and Lily smiled and knelt down to speak to her. It was something simple, just a question about a game. Or maybe something far less important, but the way she did it, with patience and warmth, was enough to make my chest tighten. The kids seemed to adore her, their eyes sparkling with excitement every time she responded. I felt out of place, like an outsider looking in on a world I could never fully understand. It was a world that didn't revolve around boardrooms, investments, or stock prices. A world where the value of someone wasn't measured in how much they could bring to the table, but in how much of themselves they gave to others. For a brief second, I wondered if I had been living in the wrong world, but then the thought quickly passed. I had my empire to run, my legacy to build. There was no time for distractions, especially ones that came in the form of a woman who didn't care about the things I thought mattered. I turned away and walked back to my team, trying to focus. But my thoughts were scattered. I couldn't get her out of my mind. The next morning, I received an unexpected call from my assistant. "Ethan, I need you to take a look at something," she said. "It's about Lily Harper." I froze. My heart rate quickened. "What about her?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We did a bit of a background check on her, just to make sure everything's in order. She's been with the school for a few years, but there's something interesting here." There was a pause on the other end. She had a promising career in finance, was accepted into a prestigious program at a top firm, but withdrew 2 weeks before starting. No one knows why. And then she decided to teach. She's also listed as a foster guardian for 2 minors. One of them is a girl named Anna. I was stunned. That wasn't the part that shocked me. There were countless people who had made unconventional career choices, but the part that hit me was how she had turned her back on an opportunity that could have easily put her in a position similar to mine. She could have been in the finance world, in the power circles, rubbing elbows with the right people. But instead, she chose this life with children, with minimal resources, with challenges I could hardly begin to comprehend. I sat back in my chair, the report in my hands feeling heavier than it should have. This wasn't just a coincidence. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Lily had every opportunity to join the ranks of people who made decisions like I did. But she didn't. She chose something else. Something real. I wasn't sure why, but I needed to see her again. A few days later, I found myself standing outside the gates of her school. It wasn't planned, at least not consciously. I just knew I had to be there. I needed to understand why she was so different, why she seemed so ... content with a life I would have never imagined for myself. The children were everywhere, laughing, playing, talking. The air was full of energy, and I felt like an outsider in a world I didn't belong to. I found her standing at the edge of the playground, talking to a few parents. She was smiling, gesturing with her hands as she spoke. She looked so at ease, so natural in this environment. A far cry from the high-pressure, high-stakes world I was accustomed to. I stood there, uncertain of what to do, until one of the children ran up to me and tugged at my jacket sleeve. "Hey, are you the guy from last night?" the little boy asked, his eyes wide. "Yeah, I guess so," I said, taken aback. It was strange that a child would recognize me, especially after just one brief meeting. He turned to Lily and yelled, "Miss Lily, it's the guy from the fancy dinner." Lily's gaze turned to me, and for the briefest moment, I saw something shift in her expression. It was subtle, but it was there surprise, curiosity, maybe even a little amusement. She walked over slowly, her usual calm composure in place. "Hi again," she said, smiling as she approached. "I didn't expect to see you here today." "I didn't either," I replied honestly, feeling a bit like an intruder in this chaotic, happy world of children and teachers. "I just thought I should stop by." She tilted her head slightly, eyes studying me. "You don't have to explain," she said softly. "It's nice to see you." Something shifted in the air between us. This wasn't just an accidental meeting anymore. It felt like a quiet turning point. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't sure about the path I had chosen. She gave me a warm smile before turning back to the kids, calling them over to clean up. I stood there for a moment longer, my heart pounding, unsure of what was happening to me. But there was one thing I knew for sure. I had to know more about her, and I was willing to cross whatever line it took to find out. The following week passed in a blur, but each day I found myself drawn back to thoughts of Lily. The more I tried to push her out of my mind, the more she lingered. It wasn't just that I was intrigued by her. There was something about her kindness, her authenticity, the way she moved through the world with such purpose that made everything in my own life feel hollow. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I told myself it was a passing curiosity, but deep down, I knew it was more. I couldn't get her out of my head, and I wasn't sure whether that was a good thing or a dangerous one. One evening, after a particularly draining meeting with my board, I found myself standing in front of the glass walls of my office, staring out at the city below. The lights twinkled in the distance, but I felt more disconnected than ever. The city was bustling, alive with energy, but none of it felt real to me anymore. That's when I made the decision. I didn't need to sit behind a desk and stare at spreadsheets for another night. I had to see her again. I picked up my phone and called my assistant. "Set up a meeting with Lily Harper," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. "Find a way to get in touch with her. I don't care how. Just make it happen." The next afternoon, my assistant called me back. "Ethan, I've reached out to her. She's agreed to meet you this evening at the school. She said she'd be there after class." I felt a sense of relief, but also a surge of nervous energy. This wasn't a business meeting, not a deal I could close with numbers and contracts. This was different. I had no plan, no script, but I needed to understand why she had such a profound effect on me. By 5:30 p.m., I was standing outside the school gates, my breath visible in the chilly air. I had driven here with no clear idea of what I was going to say, but that didn't matter. I'd figured out a long time ago that there was no such thing as right. In moments like this, there was only showing up. When Lily appeared, it was like everything else faded into the background. The way she walked, her posture open and relaxed, the gentle way she waved at the children who ran up to her as she exited the building. She didn't look like someone who had just spent hours teaching, managing dozens of kids. She looked ... free, at ease. "Ethan," she said, her eyes lighting up as she saw me. "You actually came." "I couldn't stay away," I replied, managing a smile that felt more real than I'd expected. "I wanted to see more of what you do." She raised an eyebrow, a smile tugging at her lips. Are you sure about that? You might not like what you see. This isn't the glamorous world of boardrooms and fancy dinners. I chuckled softly. Trust me, I've seen enough of that world. I'm more interested in seeing how you do this. We began walking down the street, and I noticed how the city felt quieter here, even though the sounds of traffic and chatter were all around. It was as though this part of the city, this part of her world, had a different rhythm altogether. As we walked, she told me about her students, her struggles with the school's limited resources, and her efforts to help kids like Anna, the young girl she fostered. They don't have much, she explained, but I try to make sure they at least have a place where they feel safe, where they matter. Her words hit me harder than I expected. In the world I operated in, I had always been focused on results, profits, and making a name for myself. But here she was, focused on people, not profits, on making sure someone, anyone, felt seen. We arrived at a small cafe a few blocks away. It was cozy, with low lighting and the hum of quiet conversation filling the air. We sat in a corner booth, away from the few other patrons. The moment we sat down, Lily seemed to relax, her shoulders dropping slightly as she looked across the table at me. Double quotes, so. Tell me, she said, leaning forward slightly. Why are you really here, Ethan? What do you want from all of this? I'm sure you didn't just come to chat with a school teacher. Her question was direct, no nonsense. I found myself pausing, unsure of how to respond. I didn't have a good answer, not a solid one. I had come because I felt like something was missing in my life, something I couldn't explain. I don't know, I finally said, running a hand through my hair. I guess I thought I could learn something from you. You've made me question a lot of things. About my life, about what's important. She smiled, a little knowingly. I think you already know what's important. You just haven't realized it yet. Her words hung in the air between us, and for the first time in years, I felt a twinge of uncertainty. There was truth in what she said. I had been living my life a certain way for so long, building my empire, climbing the corporate ladder, but had I been doing it for the right reasons? Had I been chasing the wrong things? Lily, I began, my voice softer than I intended. I've spent my whole life making deals, closing contracts, thinking that's what matters. But now I realize I've been missing something. Something bigger than all of that. Something that actually makes life meaningful. She looked at me for a long moment, her gaze steady. It's not too late, you know, she said quietly. You can still change. You can still choose what matters. I looked at her, the woman who had unknowingly shattered the walls I had so carefully built around myself. In that moment, I wasn't the CEO of Turner Ventures. I wasn't the man who ran a multi-million-dollar company. I was just a man who was starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than numbers and power. I don't know how to do this, I confessed, my voice thick with emotion. But I want to try. I want to try to be better, to be more present. Lily smiled, her eyes softening. That's all anyone can do. Just show up. I nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I needed to be anyone else. I didn't need to have it all figured out. All I had to do was show up, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. As we left the cafe and stepped back into the cool evening air, something shifted inside me. I didn't know where this path would lead, or what would come of it, but for the first time, I was ready to find out. With Lily by my side, I had a feeling the journey would be worth it. The days that followed were unlike anything I had experienced before. It wasn't just the time I spent with Lily, it was the shift inside me. Each day, as I continued my usual routine of meetings, projects, and decisions, I couldn't ignore the growing sense that something essential had changed. It was as if the walls I had built around myself, walls made of ambition, success, and self-preservation, had started to crack. But the cracks weren't ugly. They weren't signs of weakness. They were openings to something more, something real. I didn't know what to do with this new version of myself. This man who was starting to feel things he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Vulnerability, humility, connection. I didn't know how to reconcile it with the ruthless, driven persona I had carefully crafted over the years. But I didn't care as much as I once did. The night after our conversation at the cafe, I found myself walking through the city again, this time not as a man on a mission, but as someone who was simply walking. The streetlights above cast long shadows on the pavement, and the hum of the city felt different, less distant, more alive. I thought about the first time I met Lily, how skeptical I had been, how I had tried so hard to keep my distance. But now, the thought of seeing her again filled me with anticipation. A few days later, I found myself in her world again. This time, it wasn't by coincidence. I had called ahead and asked if I could visit the school, not for business or formal reasons, but just to observe, to see more of what she did and why it mattered so much to her. When I arrived, the schoolyard was alive with the energy of children playing and laughing, the very same energy that had drawn me in the first time. But now I wasn't just watching from a distance. I was part of it, even if only as an observer. I felt like an outsider, but in the best possible way. Lily spotted me from across the yard, and her face broke into a smile when she saw me standing there, hands in my pockets, uncertain of where to step next. "Ethan," she called, waving me over. "Glad you could make it. Come join us. The kids would love to meet you." I hesitated for a moment, then walked toward her, feeling that familiar knot of self-doubt in my stomach. But this time, it didn't paralyze me. This time, I was determined to show up, as she had taught me. She introduced me to the kids, and to my surprise, they were eager to ask me questions. "What's it like to be a CEO?" one asked. "Do you drive a Lamborghini?" Another chimed in. I laughed, surprised by the innocence of their curiosity, and answered their questions as best I could, keeping the answers simple and easy to understand. But then one little girl, who had been sitting quietly on the side, raised her hand. She couldn't have been older than 6, her face round and bright with curiosity. "Do you think you'll ever be happy?" she asked, her voice small but steady. The question hit me harder than I expected. For a moment, I froze, unsure of how to respond. I had spent my life chasing success, believing that happiness would come with more money, more power, more influence. But standing there, surrounded by children who lived in a world of simplicity and joy, I realized how little I had truly considered that question. I looked at Lily, who was watching me closely, her eyes kind but expectant. "I don't know," I said finally, my voice quieter than usual, "but I'm trying to figure that out." The little girl smiled, as if she had been expecting that answer, and in that moment, I felt a shift. I didn't need to have all the answers. I didn't need to be the perfect man or the perfect CEO. I just needed to show up, like I had been doing, and allow myself to be part of something bigger than myself. That evening, as I walked back to my car, I couldn't help but think of all the moments that had led me here. The blind date I hadn't wanted, the conversations with Lily that had opened my eyes, the moments of doubt and vulnerability that had crept in, forcing me to confront the parts of myself I had spent years hiding from. But it wasn't just about her. It was about me. It was about what I was willing to change, and what I was finally ready to face. I knew I wasn't the same person I had been a month ago. I wasn't the CEO who lived for the next deal, the next contract, the next win. I was someone who had learned that real success wasn't measured in money or accolades, but in the connections you make, the people you help, and the life you build not for yourself, but for others. Weeks passed, and my life began to settle into a new rhythm. I still ran my company, still made important decisions, but my priorities had shifted. I found myself spending more time with Lily, learning about the world she had dedicated her life to. We would meet after school, sometimes for a walk, sometimes just for coffee, and we would talk about everything: our pasts, our hopes, our fears. We didn't rush anything. We didn't need to. The connection between us grew steadily, naturally, like a plant taking root and blossoming over time. I began to see the world through her eyes, and she, in turn, started to see that there was more to life than what I had once believed. But it wasn't perfect. There were still moments of doubt, moments when I questioned whether I could truly change, whether I was worthy of the kind of life she had shown me. But with each passing day, the answers became clearer. One evening, as we sat together at the schoolyard after the kids had gone home, I turned to Lily and said, "I don't know where this is going, but I'm willing to find out. With you." She smiled, her eyes soft with something I hadn't expected. "I'm not asking for anything more than what you're already giving," she said. "I don't need perfection. I just need you to be here, now." As the days turned into months, I continued to grow, both in my personal life and in my business. My decisions were different now. They were still driven by logic and reason, but they had an added layer of compassion and thoughtfulness that had never been there before. Lily and I didn't need a label to define what we were sometimes. The most meaningful relationships don't come with a title. But what we shared was real. It was honest. It was full of depth, built on understanding, patience, and the willingness to be vulnerable. I realized that there would never be a clear, definitive ending to this chapter. Life wasn't something to be solved or fixed. It was something to be experienced, to be lived, one day at a time. And with Lily by my side, I was learning how to do just that. The journey was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning, and I was ready. But where it led, who knew? The beauty was in the uncertainty. The beauty was in simply showing up,